This is Rick Hood with all the ways to build a website.
All right, thanks everyone for coming. Yep, this is all the ways to build a website. It's kind of a broad topic, but I'll do my best to give you a taste of all the crazy newfangled ways there are to build websites and give a little bit of a history of how we got here. These slides are all up on alltheways.website, so you can just go there and browse them whenever you feel like it. So let's get going. My name is Rick Hood. I'm lead Drupal developer at Common Media in Western Mass. Great company. We do Drupal sites, WordPress sites, and a lot of wonderful people I work with there, so I'm very happy there. Been there about 8 years now. I'm also an organizer of this summit, and I help out at New England Drupal Camp. And in a past life, I was managing a boat building and service company down in Rhode Island. And I still keep my toe in the water by publishing this guidebook as sort of a side business. All right, why this talk? Why the heck am I doing this? Like I said, I do Drupal all day long at Common Media, but a couple of years ago, I dove into looking at React and Jamstack because I've heard so much about it. And when I did that, you know, of course, I learned about React to some extent, but I also sort of found this whole other world of tools and software to build websites with, and it was just crazy and kind of fun. So I thought it'd be fun to just share what I found. So that's why this talk. So this talk is in 3 parts. How did we get here? Where are we now? And how does it work? Which is a set of demos. So let's get going. How did we get here? 30 years ago, Tim Berners-Lee wrote the first web browser while he was working at CERN. He also was involved with the HTML spec, so that also came out in 1990. In 1993, CGI came along, which enabled websites to actually execute code on servers. And Perl, which was widely used by 1994, used CGI to a great extent. So back in the day, Perl was used like crazy building websites. Apparently now it's only used on 0.2% of websites. Some of you may have used Perl back in the day. PHP came along in 95. We all know PHP, and now it's used by about 80% of websites in the world. JavaScript also came along in 95. Supposedly 95% of websites use JavaScript, mainly on the client side. MySQL came along in 95. Active server pages came along in 1996. That's what I started with. More on that later. And actually, that used to be really big, I remember, but now it looks like it's around 11% of websites use ASP or .NET now. CSS came along in 96. We all know and love CSS. Flash came along in 96. I used Flash quite a bit back in the day, but no more. And then there were others, Python and Java, of course. Maybe some of you remember Macromedia's Cold Fusion. That was around in the mid-90s. Ruby, the language, came along then, but not Rails yet. And some others like Erlang, Scala, and quite a few others. And then web servers. We had Apache and Microsoft IIS come out in 1995. Those are the big ones. And then Nginx came along in, let's see, when was that? 2004, and then Cloudflare later. Then there were tons of code editors from Emacs to VS Code. Personally, I started with Dreamweaver, jumped to Coda, then to PHP Storm, and then to VS Code. And I might have used Front Page for a while, but I don't want to talk about that. And then later, we had a lot of tools come along that utilize some of these technologies. So Blogger came out in 2000, when was that? 1999, Blogger came out. And I think that used PHP. But that was an example of a software as a service type thing. Then we had a lot of other tools come along: Drupal, WordPress, Shopify, Squarespace, Rails came out, Joomla, and many others. So let's recap the first 2 decades. So it seems like the 90s was the decade of a boom in basic web technologies. I mean, a lot happened in the 90s. Look at all that stuff. And then in the 2000s, we had all these tools come out that sort of built on those basic technologies. And I know Drupal is one of those tools that I use all the time. So what's next? Where are we now? First, a little detour about my path. Back when I was still in the boat building business, this guy who was working with me said, "Hey, come on down. I want you to meet a guy that I know in Newport, Rhode Island." His name was Mark Bisline. And at that time, Mark was doing using Macromedia Director to make interactive CD tours of private schools. And he gave us a demo. And I just remember walking out of his office thinking, man, I want to be doing that someday because it was so cool. So I got Director and I learned some lingo, which was its language. And I got Photoshop because I quickly realized you had to have some good imagery to put into your Director movies. Movies is what they were called. And so I fell in love with Photoshop. And then shortly, pretty soon after that, Flash came along. So I never really did much with Director because you could do a lot in Flash that you could do in Director. So I fell in love with Flash and did that. Then when we sold the boat business in '99, I took a left turn and went into graphic design and web design. I did a lot of ASP and Flash sites and then finally moved to PHP and Drupal. So I started with Dreamweaver, ASP, Flash, moved to Drupal. And then today I'm still doing Drupal, but starting to look at other things. I think one cool thing is Mark ended up founding schoolyard.com to build websites for schools. And he ended up using Drupal for that. So at the end, all his schoolyard sites were built on Drupal. So that I thought that was kind of a coincidence. All right, so where are we now? I think there's been 5 overlapping areas during the past decade that have really exploded things as far as how you can build websites. So one is the rise of JavaScript frameworks and libraries. Another is decoupling front end from back end, sometimes called headless. And partly because of that, there's many new options now for back end as API, basically headless back ends. Static site generators are on the rise. They're kind of separate from all this other stuff, but they have been on the rise and kind of interlock with these other technologies. And finally, there's a lot of easy ways to deploy, build, and host websites. So we're going to look at those. So JavaScript, I think when Node came along in 2009, that kind of enabled an explosion of a whole bunch of other things like Express, Angular, Ember, React, Vue, and a whole bunch of other ones. So that's one thing that's happened in the past decade. Then we got the concept of headless, where you have something on your back end that's storing the data that's providing an API, usually JSON, but it could be XML, or now GraphQL is another thing. We'll look at that in a sec. And your front end, usually JavaScript, would interact with that API. Then we have a lot of new options for CMS as a back end. So we have the traditional ones like WordPress, Drupal, Django, et cetera, that made it easy to provide their data as JSON. And then a whole bunch of new ones came along. Contentful is a very well-known one. That's software as a service as a headless backend. And then we get all these other ones: Netlify, Prismic, Sanity, Statomatic, and the list goes on and on. So I'm going to jump over to this headless.cms.org just to show you the huge list of them that there are. Kind of scrolls on and on and on. So you might have fun browsing this to just see all the ones that are out there. So that's many options for backend as API. Static site generators. This is kind of a separate thing, but this has also exploded in the past decade. Jekyll is maybe the first one or one of the first ones. Github Pages uses Jekyll, but then we have a whole bunch of other ones. So I'm going to flip over to that site. And if you scroll this, you'll see all the different static site generators there are. Gatsby, you've heard of that before, I'm sure. There's just tons of them. So static site generators. Oh, I should explain if you don't know what a static site is. It's basically just a site that's static files, HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. It's just sitting there as a server, and that's what gets served to you. There's no processing that happens on the server. It just sends you those files. So they're super fast sites, which is nice. And then a whole bunch of services came along to deploy, build, and host sites. Heroku, GitHub Pages, Platform SH, Firebase is used as a backend, but you can also deploy your site there. Netlify is a really popular one, as is Zeit, GitLab. I should have put Acquia and Pantheon here probably, but they're sort of specific for Drupal or WordPress, so I didn't include those, but they should probably be included. Anyways, we have all these new services to deploy and host. So all together, we've got the frameworks, we've got headless API, we've got backend only CMS, we've got static site generators, and we've got tools that make it easier to deploy, build, and host sites. So here's one example. So starting over on the right, we've got our data stored in MySQL. We've got a CMS, in this case, WordPress. That's providing JSON. It's all its data in JSON. And then in this case, we're looking at Gatsby, where Gatsby's sucking in that data from the JSON API. In this case, it's using GraphQL. That's what that pink logo is. And all the data gets sucked from the JSON API into GraphQL. And then within Gatsby, React is querying that GraphQL database, because now your data all lives in there. And Gatsby is also a static site generator. So it does its build process and spits out on the left-hand side HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files, and that's what gets hosted on your web server. Although this is a static site generator, Gatsby nothing prevents you from making calls to that API from JavaScript in your files. So you can do that. It doesn't have to be all server-side rendered, but generally it is. This is simply showing the same thing, but showing that left-hand part can all be done on Netlify. This is showing another example where you can combine APIs. So you could have a Shopify API and a WordPress API all getting sucked into Gatsby. And so all that data would live in GraphQL and be available to the React app that's within Gatsby. And this is just showing all the different options on the right-hand side to provide that API. So, and you can see also where they store their data. So for example, Netlify CMS, for example, stores its data in Markdown files, which is kind of interesting. So do some of these other ones. Prismic stores its data in GraphQL. Sanity stores it in GraphQL. Contentful stores it in something called Neo4j. So that's just showing all of those options. And then this slide here is basically my whole talk in a slide pretty much. So the right-hand part, the CMS and the data part I've already talked about. But if we jump over to the left where it says many other SSG/SSR options, that means static site generator or server-side rendering options. So I've been using Gatsby as an example, but other ways to do what Gatsby is doing here is you could use Next.js in React. You could use Nuxt in Vue.js. You could use other static site generators like Jekyll, Hugo, or Eleventy. And there's just tons and tons of options for that. Then if we move to the right a little bit where it says or straight up client-side render options, you can do React directly to Firebase. We're going to take a look at that as an example. You could do Vue.js, just sucking the data from the JSON API, and many other options like that. And that would be client-side rendered instead of server-side rendered. And then there's the do-it-yourself software as a service options like Squarespace and Wix. So look at all these different ways to build websites. It's kind of crazy. And I'm not showing everything here because it's just not room on the slide, but you get the idea. All right, so we're at the demo portion, and let's see how much time I've got left. I got 30 minutes left and 20 minutes of demo, perfect. Okay, so we're gonna look at 5 demos: Squarespace, GitHub Pages, Eleventy plus Sanity, which is a static site generator with Sanity as the backend. We're going to look at a React and Firebase app, which is hosted on Netlify, and we're going to look at a Gatsby and Drupal app. So here we go. So Squarespace, this is one of the simplest methods of creating a website, and it's pretty do-it-yourself. So all my demos are videos. So let's see how this goes. Okay, let's take a quick look at how to build a site with Squarespace. You've all seen Squarespace before if you've seen the Super Bowl ads or whatever. I'm logged into my Squarespace account. I just have one Squarespace site for the Amherst Education Foundation. We'll take a look at that in a bit. But to create a new site, you just click this Create a Site button. It brings you to a bunch of templates first. It wants you to pick a template first. So I'm just going to pick this first one I find here. And I'm not going to change any defaults. I'm just going to do this real fast. So I just do next, next, get started. And there's my site. Now, I can now edit this site, but I'm not going to edit this site. I'm going to go edit my Amherst Education Foundation site. But if I go into settings and if I go into domains, I can see the domain that I can get to this site, the actual published site. So I'm going to copy this. Copy. There should be an easier way to get to it, but I can't figure out what it is. So if I paste that in there, there's that site that I just built. Okay, so that's how fast it is to build a site. So now I'm going to go back to my dashboard, and I'm going to go into Amherst Education Foundation because I know this one better. And if you go to the Pages section, you can choose any page to edit, but I'll just stick in the home page. And the way Squarespace works is, as you hover over things, you find this admin bar here. So if I click Edit here, and then I go inside here, these little widgets pop up. See these things popping up? And if you click on it, if I click in here, for example, I can add any kind of widget. So I could add more text, I could add an image, I could add a video, a gallery. So all kinds of different things you can add inside your page. So that's basically the way Squarespace works. There's not that much to it. I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's pretty self-explanatory. It's pretty self-explanatory how to create new pages. When you build a site, it comes with certain default sample pages, so you can mess around with those. But I just encourage you just to get a Squarespace account and try messing around with it. It's, like I said, it's all pretty self-explanatory. Okay, that's enough on Squarespace. So Squarespace you can do a lot with. So Mark, one of my favorite podcasts is Mark Maron's WTF podcast, and it uses it. Maybe I can go there just to show you. It's a pretty nice website. So for Squarespace, you can do a lot with it. But anyhow, so that's one option. So let's move to the next thing. GitHub Pages. So if you have a custom coded site, a super simple way to deploy it is with GitHub Pages. So let's look at how that's done. So let's start with what's probably one of the super simplest way to deploy a website. On my GitHub account, I've created a repo called sample GitHub Pages, and the only thing in it is a README file and an index.html file. And then what I did was I went over to settings and I scrolled down to the GitHub Pages section, and I chose the source that I want to this GitHub Pages site to use, and I did not choose a theme. And when I saved that master branch, it created the site here. So if I click on here, you can see the super simple index.html file there. So this couldn't be easier really, and couldn't be simpler because I just have one file up there, but you can imagine you could have CSS files, JavaScript files, whatever you want. So if you're just creating a real simple site, this is one super simple way to do it. Of course, I've downloaded that to my local, and that's where I did the work of adding the HTML file and committing that and pushing it up. The other thing to mention is that you can connect custom domains to this, so you don't have to have this URL. You can have whatever domain you want. So that's it. That's a super simple way to publish a simple website with GitHub Pages. I think I said super simple enough during that video. Anyways, it is pretty simple. So, and also GitHub Pages uses Jekyll, so it can read data from Markdown files. This is a link here to go learn more about that. All right, next demo. This is Eleventy plus Sanity plus Netlify. So Eleventy is one of the hot new, what do you call it, static site generators. And so let's look at how that works. Okay, let's take a look at making a blog with the Eleventy static site generator in the Sanity backend, all hosted on Netlify. Okay, here I am at sanity.io. I'll log in, it's going to remember me. So it takes me here. You see I've done a couple of projects here, blog with Gatsby and blog with Eleventy. If you want to create a new project, you can click this and it will give you some instructions on how to do it on your local and your terminal. But if you go to Get Started, and then you go over here to Starter Projects, and then see All Starter Projects. This is where I went to create the thing I'm going to show you. Also, I blog with Gatsby, I created from here, Portfolio with Gatsby, a whole bunch of other ones, Next.js, events with Next.js, and then this blog with Eleventy is the one I'm going to show you. So I created what I'm going to show you by clicking this. So let's go back to where I was, and I'm going to click into my blog with Eleventy project. So up here is the link to the actual Sanity backend. So I'm going to click on that. And here I am at the Sanity backend for this thing. And up at the top, it gives you some help videos. If you scroll down a little bit, it shows you here Sanity Studio and your blog website. So both Sanity itself and the blog are both hosted on Netlify. So Sanity doesn't have, to my knowledge, its own place to host things. It partners with Netlify, so when you create a Sanity backend, it hosts it on Netlify. And also the blog that we're going to look at with Eleventy is hosted on Netlify. Scroll down here, it gives me some other project information. And then over here, it shows my recent blog posts. So let's make a new blog post. I'm going to go into here, and then I'm going to click plus, blog post. I'll just do something really simple just to do it fast. The slug is going to be the path. One thing I notice, if you don't select a date here, it won't publish it. So I'm not going to do an image or anything just to make it fast. And I'll just put test here. All right, I'm going to click publish. Okay, it says it's published. Let's go back to settings. I'm sorry, let's go back to blog with Eleventy. So although it says it's published, it's not going to show up on the website. So let's click view here to actually look at the website. So nothing to look at, but this is what the Eleventy blog looks like. And if I go back here, and you can see that I don't see that new test one. So what I have to do is deploy. So I click deploy here. And now it's going to build on Netlify, the new build of the Netlify site. I mean, sorry, of the Eleventy site. So this is going to take a while to build, so I'm going to stop the video and come back. Okay, I'm back, and you can see the build was successful. So if we go over to the blog again, we should see that test. Yep, there's the test. All right, so that's how you edit content using Sanity and Eleventy. Let's go back. So Sanity uses GraphQL. That's what this pink logo is for its backend. And the setup with Eleventy is that it's querying GraphQL for the data and then doing its build process to create the blog post itself. So I'm going to go into the code a little bit just to show you some stuff. This is the repo for what you were just looking at. There's a studio folder, there's a web folder. The studio is obviously for the Sanity Studio part, and the web folder is for the Eleventy part. I'm really just going to briefly show you some things here. So you can see that it uses Nunjuck's templating language. So you can see here that this is the template for a post, where you've got the post title, you've got the post body, etc. And then you've got some front matter up here, which is similar to what you can do with Markdown files. And this is telling it to use this layout. There's the base layout. So it's using this as the base layout, and then using this as the data, telling you what data to get. And that's all in the includes folder. When it does its build thing, it gets built into the site folder, which does not get committed to the repo. That gets built up on Netlify. So there's way more to talk about here, but I just wanted to briefly show you what the structure of the code looks like. So I know you probably couldn't follow that code much, but this is just to give you a taste of what these things are like. So hopefully that gave you a taste. And then here's some links to some other really good tutorials about Eleventy. All right, next is React and Firebase. This is kind of my favorite. This is the opposite of a static site generated thing. This is totally client side rendered, and it's very dynamic. And this is what I'm going to show is what I built when I did the React for Beginners course that is done by Wes Boss. I might actually say that in the video. So here goes. Okay, let's take a look at React and Firebase working together. This is going to be a client-side rendered app rendering the React in your browser, not on the server. And Firebase is a very fast database service that uses WebSockets, so the changes you see are immediate. And it's going to be hosted on Netlify. So what we're going to be looking at is what gets built in this course, React for Beginners by Wes Boss, and he creates this fish market catch of the day fish market app in React. And this is what it looks like hosted up on Netlify. You can see how you can add things to your order, etc. And then over here is the inventory control. I'm logged into the app, so that's why I can see this inventory control. I'll just simply show you that it's hosted on Netlify here. In this case, Netlify is not doing any kind of a build process or anything like that. All it's doing is hosting the files. So it's just, that's all it's doing. And the way I deployed it is I did not connect it to the Git repo. I simply used the Netlify command line interface on my local computer, and it's just a command that's Netlify deploy that you can just push it up to this particular instance on Netlify. So it's going to connect to Firebase. Here's the Firebase site, firebase.google.com. I'm already logged in, so if I click go to console, I'll see what I have going on up here at Firebase. And I have two things, some kind of test I was doing, and then here's the catch of the day one. So if I click on that, there's various things over on the left-hand side. I'm not going to go over authentication here, but that is how, when you take that course, that is how authentication works on the fish market, to log in to be able to change the inventory. But if I click on the database settings, I'm going to see this. Now, the reason why it's got this funny name here is that the way he sets up the course is that when you first go to the site, it asks you to pick a store, and it automatically creates a random store name. So that's why that funny name is there. But I'm not going to create a new store. I already have this store. So I'm going to pop that open, and you can see the fishes here. So fish 1, fish 2. Fish 1 is Atlantic halibut. Fish 2 is lobster, etc., etc. So that's the inventory. Now what I'm going to do is open two browser windows to show you how quickly this works. So in the left hand, I've got that app open. And on the right hand, I've got Firebase open. Now watch the name over in Firebase Atlantic halibut as I change it on the website to Pacific. See how quickly that changed in the database? So that's how fast this stuff works. The other thing I want to show you too is that if I add to order and I change it back to Atlantic, it changes in all three places that it shows in the app, which is one thing that's cool about React, right? And it also changed it up in the database. So I can show you how I can go the other way, where I can do it from the database. And it changed it in the app in all three places that it's being used. So that's, like I said, a very dynamic type of site, all client-side rendered, not server-side rendered, not a static site at all, a very dynamic site. And I'm just going to briefly show you the code involved. And it's going to have to be brief because it's way too much to go into what all this app does. But it's got the usual React src folder with components folder. One file you need to do is create this base.js file, where you import Rebase from Rebase, import Firebase from Firebase, and then it just needs an API key, it needs the authorization domain, and it needs the database URL. So it just needs those three things, and then you create your base component, and then you export Firebase app and export default base, and then they get used over in your app. So this is the main component, app.js, and it gets used in this section here, component did mount. And this is the code that's actually syncing the local state of the React app to the Firebase database. So that's the code that's doing that. And again, it's way too much to go into all of this, but I just wanted to briefly, show you where the code is that connects to Firebase. So I think that's it. I would just recommend going into Firebase and seeing all that it can do. Get yourself a Firebase account and just play around with it. It's pretty neat. All right, that's it. So at the end of this talk, I got a whole bunch of resources to go over, but for this one, React for Beginners, firebase.google.com is where you see that. This is another really good one on getting started with the React and Firebase. So let's go to the next one. This one is Gatsby plus Drupal plus Netlify plus Pantheon, because Pantheon is where the Drupal site is hosted. And this is basically what I learned when I took a training at New England Drupal Camp last fall from Shane Thomas, who does code karate and stuff. So he's a good resource particularly for Gatsby stuff. All right, let's look at this one. Okay, let's take a look at Gatsby plus Drupal, one of the many ways to build a website these days. So what I'm showing you here is what was basically built in a Gatsby training I took at New England Drupal Camp with Shane Thomas in October, and there's a link here to see Shane's videos on how to do Gatsby, which are quite good. So here the Gatsby front end is going to be hosted on Netlify. That's a service that's really great. And the Drupal site is going to be hosted on Pantheon. It would be an all-day course to show you the details of how to set all this stuff up, but this whole talk is to give you a taste of what can be done, so that's what we're going to do here. So here's my Drupal site up on Pantheon, and I'm showing you a view of articles. I've got 3 articles here, Peacock A, Peacock B, Peacock C. This, I don't need to do anything more than this. This could be my website. I don't need Gatsby. But if I wanted to leverage the power of Gatsby, I might want to connect this to Gatsby, so that's what I'm doing here. Here I'm just showing you the Pantheon dashboard if you haven't seen it before, and I'm just using the development site. I don't need the test or live site. You can get a few free sites on Pantheon and just use the development version for playing around with the site. If I click this link here, it will take me to the development site. I just want to show you a couple more things in the Drupal side. One is that Drupal has a module called JSON API, and if you simply enable that module, Drupal will spit out all the data for the Drupal site at this path JSON API. So that's kind of all you need to do on Drupal to get it to work with Gatsby. You just need to provide this JSON data to Gatsby. So let's go over to the Gatsby side of things. This is the Gatsby site on my local host. You can see Peacock A, B, and C. It looks a little bit like the view on the Drupal side. If I click one of these, I go to Peacock A, etc. So that's on my local site, and then this is up on Netlify. And same deal there. So this is the Gatsby site pulling the data from the Drupal site. Now, how does that happen? How does that all connect together? One of the great things about Gatsby is it's got a whole bunch of different plugins. So in this case, I'm using Gatsby Source Drupal plugin, and it makes it dead simple to connect a Gatsby site to a Drupal site. You install this plugin, and then you simply put this into your Gatsby config file. I'm going to show you that in a second. So in Gatsby config, you have these plugins, and this is the plugin for Gatsby Source Drupal. You give it a URL to the Drupal site, and you can give it a path, but it defaults to the JSON API path if you don't give it a path. So let's look at the code. This is the only code I'll show you for, for this video. And here you can see the Gatsby source Drupal plugin. And I've added one thing, which is basic authentication. So I hide my site with user and pass, and I provide that here. You can stick the user and pass for this into Netlify, so that's where Netlify is getting the information. Okay, let's go over to the Netlify side. Here's my Netlify account where I've been playing around with different things. And then this site here is the one we're talking about. So when I click on that and click there, it brings me to the site, and then here's my articles. Now what I want to show you but not actually do is how easy it is to set up a site on Netlify. So you click this new site from Git button over here. You say where your repo is located. Mine's on GitHub. When I click that, I authorized Netlify to see two repos. One is this Pro Gatsby 2 repo, which is a course I took, a Level Up Toots course. And then this one here, Gatsby Drupal, is the one that is for this site. So if I click on that, and if I were to continue this, it would just deploy the site that you've already seen. I think I can deploy more than one site from a repo, but I won't do that. But I just want to show you, really this is just to show you how easy it is to deploy something to Netlify. So that's that. All right, so maybe, yeah, so what's going on here is that you need Netlify to host the files, but you also need Netlify to run Node.js because that's what's compiling the stuff in Gatsby. So Netlify is doing both of those things. And then of course you need Pantheon to host your PHP Drupal application. And it has the MariaDB database that Drupal hooks into. So yep, so there are many hosting options for your Drupal sites. And I guess there's many options for where you could put your Gatsby, but Netlify is a real nice one. So that's 5 different sort of quick demos. These were quick. They're just to give you a taste of what can be done. They're obviously, don't tell you how to do these things because that would take all day for each of them. But hopefully it gives you a taste. So now what? Let's see, I got something in chat. Seems pretty complex with lots of moving parts. Why would someone pick that over another? Yeah, so these are complicated, but let me address that at the end. So I'm giving you a lot of things to think about here, about things to look into. So what I'd suggest for anybody interested in this, and you might not be interested in this, but anybody interested, I would definitely recommend learning some React. So these little numbers here go to links down here. So there's 3 different places to look for that. You might want to try out Gatsby. There's a link to try out it there. Try Netlify, try Sanity, try a simple GitHub Pages site. That's one of the simplest things you can do and just see how it works. Try out Firebase, like I mentioned in that demo. Try Squarespace just for the heck of it, just so you have that in your tool belt. Whether you think you'll ever use it or not, it's sort of a good thing to know how it works. I would recommend listening to the Syntax podcast. Wes Boss and Scott Tolinsky keep you up to date on the JavaScript world, and they talk about a lot of this stuff. And that's where I first heard about a lot of this stuff, to tell you the truth. And then I'd recommend going to the Jamstack Boston meetup that Jim Fisk, Stephanie Luz, and Joe Escuzio, I guess that's how you pronounce his name, run. And they're also giving talks tomorrow. So Jim is giving a talk and Stephanie's giving a talk. So look those talks up. And what else? That's it. So take a look at this list. Again, this is up on alltheways.website, so you can browse that at your leisure. And yeah, so that's the end. So let's go back and look at questions.
Yep, and you can type your questions in the group chat, or you can unmute yourself if you want.
So yeah, Lily, these things are pretty well, with the exception of things like Squarespace and GitHub Pages. Some of these things are really complicated, like the hooking up Gatsby to a Drupal site. Actually, that's easy. What's not easy is the React part. So Gatsby uses React, so you really need to know React in order to use it. And it's not a simple thing to learn how to do queries and from React to the GraphQL and all that jazz. But again, you know, you wouldn't dive into that unless you really wanted to learn it. But you know, it took me about a couple of weekends on that React for Beginners course to really understand how React works. So I wouldn't be afraid of it. What else do we have here? Do you have any experience with porting content from a WordPress? Oh, into a static site generator? I don't, but what I showed you with Gatsby and Drupal, the exact same thing can be done with WordPress. Of course, that's Gatsby, so you'd have to know React, so that makes it more complicated. But the act of hooking up WordPress to Gatsby is simple, but then creating your front end out of React is not simple. So I don't have any examples of other static site generators to use with Drupal or WordPress. I know there's something called Tome, T-O-M-E. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it for Drupal. That's, I guess, takes a Drupal site and turns it into a static site. So T-O-M-E is one thing you might look into for Drupal, but sorry, I don't know for WordPress. I was thinking more something like one-time port. Yeah, I don't know. So the question is, I was thinking something like doing a one-time port and using a headless CMS going forward. Yeah, I don't know about that, sorry. If you could get your data from a site into other data format, like even if you could get into Markdown files, then you could use something else like Netlify CMS uses Markdown files. But that's all I can think of off the top of my head. And then you hook that up to something like Eleventy or whatever. Which CMS has the best editor for non-coder to edit pages easily? Well, WordPress is kind of known as sort of the best, you know, editing experience. I think Drupal's doing better and better, but you can't go wrong with WordPress. I think you can't go wrong with Drupal too, but WordPress is like, I don't know, 30% of the sites out there. So either of those are good. Content for a you know, headless backend, Contentful is really popular, but that's a software as a service, so you pay X dollars a month for that. All right, any other questions? Got a couple more minutes here. Thank you, Lily. Thank you, Joan. So I'd say go have fun. You know, it's really a lot of fun to look into this stuff. And although some of this stuff can get complicated, there's so many good classes out there. Like this React for Beginners is fantastic, but there's tons of other ones out there. And that's the way I like to learn. I like to learn from video courses. And anyways, I just recommend you go do that and have fun. Yeah, React for Beginners is great. All right, hope you're having a great Nerd Summit, and thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks, Rick.
Thanks.
Sure thing.
See you guys tomorrow.